we have built in the past. The ones that allowed us 20,000 years ago to cross for the very first time into the Americas as the ice was retreating when the first peoples came to these lands. Or 1,000 years ago when the Vikings built a ship that could allow them to cross the Atlantic for the first time. Or 800 years ago when the first of us got to New Zealand. Or a little over 100 years ago when the first of us got to Antarctica. Or 60 years ago when we first got to space. This machine has lifted 60% of everybody who's been to space on board this incredible human creation and an ability to get to places and do things that otherwise would be impossible, like build the International Space Station that we built. That huge robot arm on the top there, bigger than a redwood tree, that was built all across Canada. Canada built the International Space Station. 15 countries working together, doing 200 different experiments at the time, trying to figure out what dark matter and dark energy are, using the laboratory on board to do experiments that are impossible on Earth, and most importantly, looking at the world, going around it 16 times a day, trying to understand our planet like we've never understood it before. It's a place where if you spill your water, it just floats uncannily there next to you. Or you can just push off with your toes and be the greatest gymnast in all history. Just push off and you're a Cirque du Soleil performer. You're beautifully coordinated suddenly. Or you can float to the window like Tracy here and such a personal relationship with the world. See the world like you've never seen it before. As you go from Victoria to St. John's in 10 minutes. See our entire country in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. But it's dangerous. Exploration, the pursuit of new ideas, everything worth doing in life has risks. I was the only Canadian to command a spaceship so far. And to be able to command a group of people, to align them with common purpose, to give them the training and the education that they need so that they can be creative on their own, to communicate with them so we understand what we're doing together, and to celebrate that's what's happening. It's like one constant Elevate festival on board a spaceship the whole time. It is creativity and community and innovation constantly going on. And the rewards are spectacular. To be able to put on a spacesuit and pull yourself out to be alone in the universe that we celebrate as a nation on our $5 bill. I was Canada's first spacewalker. The personal experience of pulling yourself out into space and having the entire world silent next to you and the unfathomably huge eternity of the rest of the universe in 3 dimensions around you. Can you kill the lights once more for me, please? And to be able, while you're outside, to go through the northern lights and have them pour around your ship and ripple between your legs. And this is not some computer graphic. This is what happens when we visualize something that used to be impossible. We work together to build the vehicles and the technology to get us there, and then some people are willing to take the risk to actually go do this thing and put it into action. And it's, okay, lights again, please. And it's not just orbiting the world, but to collectively, including Canada, develop the James Webb Telescope, which is out at a range point, and it has this is using Canadian sensors, Canadian pointing and sensing technology, see a planet that is orbiting another star and look through its atmosphere. That's what you're looking at the bottom. Looking through the atmosphere of a planet that is light years away from us. Trying to understand, how do planets work? What's normal? What is the future for our own planet? Are we alone in the universe or not? Just 100 million kilometers away on Mars, Perseverance is driving around, and it's got its little buddy there, Ingenuity, the little drone to scout out cool locations. And it's using a little drill that was made on Vancouver Island to drill down into the sedimentary rock of an old river delta to see, because that's the natural place on Earth we look for fossils. And collecting all of those. So maybe we can answer that fundamental question of are we alone or not? And what does that mean for us collectively, and how we should treat ourselves and treat the world. But even closer to home, we discovered something about the moon in the last few years that really changes our objectives. When Apollo 11, those two guys walked on the moon at the equator nearly, it's dry. It's drier than the Sahara. But at the poles, not only are you always in the sun, so there's power, but the craters are full of water. And when we tally it up, it's about 400 billion liters of water. So just like the first people that came to Lake Erie, which is about 400 billion liters of water, if you've got power from the sun and you've got water, then all you need is a habitat and a way to grow food, and you can live there. And that's where all 77 space agencies of the world are currently headed, including NASA, who has this big vehicle out on the pad right now, a traditional government rocket, the Artemis rocket. It's having a fueling test going on right now, in fact, and there's Artemis in the moon. And as soon as it does its test flight, maybe on Tuesday is the current planned launch date, the next flight will have people on board going to the moon. And this time, not just to do the early exploration, but to start setting up and staying. And one of those crew members is going to be Canadian. One of our current astronauts will be going to the moon after this flight, on the next flight of Artemis. Sort of the standard big government program. And the Russians have their big government program with their big heavy lifter and a Soyuz, like I flew on my third flight. One of these Soyuzes just launched 30 minutes ago with 2 Russians and an American on board. Even with all the political strife and the horrific treatment we sometimes interpersonally get to on the surface. Meanwhile, as a species, we are exploring and living together in space in a peaceful way. We've never needed a good, clear example of how we ought to behave like we have right now, and like recently evidenced just in Baikonur, Kazakhstan. And China has their big government program. They launched a big rocket yesterday for an Earth observation satellite to try and understand the climate of the world. But the really interesting, oh, by the way, at the end we'll have a few minutes for questions. The really interesting part of what's happening in space now and the future is private and simplification. After these 60 years since Gagarin and Shepard, we have made some huge advances. This is in New Zealand, Rocket Lab. They've launched 30 times to space, and not just orbit, but they've actually sent a probe to the moon, and they're sending a probe to Venus to try and understand that sister planet. And Astra is a new rocket company that's launched 7 times. But the real game changer is SpaceX. And they've launched 179 times with this rocket, and the big change is it's reusable. The big, heavy first stage can land and get filled up with fuel, and one of them has already been used 14 times. This is a radical decrease in cost of access to space, and that is the biggest factor going on right now. It's even spilled over into private spaceflight, where companies like Virgin Galactic are seeing if you can make a business out of just taking tourists up to the bottom of space, or the same with Blue Origin with their vehicle. And Virgin Galactic has flown a handful of people. Blue Origin has already flown 30 people to space on this little ship. And it's just like the flight that Al Shepard took back in 1961. But the real game changer is Starship. This is 100% reusable spaceship, where the first stage and the second stage can both be reused. And what that does to cost, it's worth putting a graph. This is cost versus time. Across the bottom is starting in 1960, going up to today. And you can see the rockets of those times across the bottom. But on the left is cost, kilogram to orbit, and it's a logarithmic scale. So at the bottom it's $100. Halfway up it's about $2,000. At the top it's $50,000 to get a kilogram to orbit. And if you look at the traditional government rocket ships across the top, like the ones I flew, they're incredibly expensive because it's new technology. But what Falcon 9 has done and what Starship is going to do, it's going to take something that used to cost $50,000 and is now going to cost $200,000. 250 times cheaper. Imagine if your ticket to Acapulco was $1,000 and someone came in and said, hey, you can get to Acapulco for $4. Want to go? It would change your decision making. It would change your entire model. And that is a radical new change that the Vikings and the First Nations and every explorer in history would have loved to take advantage of. And it's not just a paper route.
Horizontal descent rates now. We're passing 6 kilometers. We get ignition. Starship heading back to the landing zone.
This vehicle has already demonstrated itself, and they've stacked it with the full orbital capability, and its first orbital flight has been approved by the FAA. It should be later this year or early next year. And this vehicle is enabling all sorts of new technologies. Not having to have a human-tended space station, but there are 3 or 4 different companies that are building automated space stations so that we can take advantage of Earth orbit and the weightlessness and the perfect vacuum up there to do things that are impossible on Earth. Taking advantage of the vision and the legacy of technology to give us opportunities that we've never had before. And NASA has chosen this rocket as one of its 2 that will take people to the surface of the moon. And I'm not sure whether the next person on the moon will get there on a government rocket ship or get there on a SpaceX rocket ship. It could be a private citizen, be the next person that lands on the moon. And you don't have to look very far into the future to think, with heavy lift capability to the surface of the moon, like Starship is building us, a solar-powered human settlement somewhere besides the Earth. Sounds crazy, but people have been living on the space station for the last 21 years. We left Earth in the year 2000. Everything seems crazy until a group of people develop the technology, have the leadership, and the tenacity to make it happen. And we need it. We have serious problems to solve on Earth. And that enormous resource of the moon, bigger than Africa, unmined geology, trying to understand, trying to push the technology of navigation and of weather forecasting and of telecommunication and understanding the health of our world, trying to map our world. We have, in November, we're going to go over 8 billion human beings. How can we feed all those people? How can we build them a good quality of life? What do you do with their waste? How do we not treat everything like a bottomless garbage dump? All of it is technologically possible, but it's groups of people like the 30,000 that are coming to Elevate that are willing to look at where we are right now and look at the technologies we have, the ones that we need, put it together and start solving some of the problems that are facing us. That's what we absolutely need to be able to hand off to our kids so that they can be inspired by different things that we were, but also recognize the path to take them from being a little kid here in Toronto and try and get the skills and get the tenacity and get the group of people to solve the problems that are facing us all. It's the very essence of Elevate, but it's also the very essence of what we are all facing collectively as a species on this planet. All right, if anybody has any questions, please just stick your hand up and I will do my best. Yes, right here. Stay quiet.
So I'm part of the Knowledge Society, and it's like a group of teenagers like forming different careers in technology.
She's part of a group of teenagers that is in a group of technology. What's your question?
So what's your advice for like young students interested in just getting introduced to technology?
What's my advice for young students that are interested in technology? Number 1 is what irritates you? What do you think needs to be changed in the world? What pisses you off? In your heart of hearts. And don't just be irritated. Don't just be one of those morons on the internet who just writes about everything all the time. Actually say, this is a problem. I don't want to be just part of the problem or one of the critics sniping about it. How can I actually get involved in solving this problem? And then what skills don't I have yet? Where am I going to learn about stuff? How can I become someone who can personally deal with it or organize like you are with your other students, a group of people? And you should be, if there's one thing that identifies or is common to astronauts, it's a perpetual dissatisfaction with their level of competence. You can only try and keep getting better at things. And so that's what I would do, is focus on a goal of something that irritates you, recognize the technologies and skills and organization to address it, and then start changing who you are and the people around you to take action. Any other questions? People with microphones back there? Yes, no? Yeah, go ahead. Sir, here in line. Is there one right there? Is that what? Oh, who's right here? Oh, over here. I'm sorry, over here. Go ahead. What's the number on your microphone?
Number 2,
Okay, there we are. Try harder. Go ahead.
once resources are brought from the moon to the earth, how will they be distributed?
Well, right now we have just literally scratched the surface of the moon. Like, literally. We just looked at a couple places. But if you look at our best guess of the moon's geomorphology, like how the moon was formed, our best guess is that crete, which is like potassium, rare earth elements, and phosphorus, I think, those should have been sort of collected on the moon. So it might be a great resource for some of the radioactive elements that we need and for the rare earth elements that we need. And then we also think there may be a strong proportion of helium-3 on the surface. But we haven't really been there to survey it very well yet. But with those, we have to build the infrastructure, build the railway, build the capability to go back and forth. But you're right, we need regulation. Just like when cars were first built, or airplanes were first built, it was mayhem. There were no stoplights, street lights, no gas stations, no good roads, no air traffic control, no instrument flying. It took quite a while for us to build a regulatory and safe environment so that we could integrate that in a normal society. And we're still early days of bringing back useful things from the moon. But in parallel with the technology, we absolutely need the regulatory and environmental agreements. And we're working on it at all different government levels, at the United Nations, at the Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, at the Office of Outer Space Affairs, at the nonprofit that I run, which is the Open Lunar Foundation. There's lots of people working to answer your exact question. Maybe one last question and then we're done. Yes, right here. Go ahead.
So what do you see as the end goal of space travel?
What do I see as the end goal?
End goal of space travel for humanity. Would you see humanity in space in, let's say, 100 years?
Well, 100 years is not the end goal. Wow. The end goal? No, I think it's amazing when we have 3 kids. When you watch a kid, we learn to walk way before we learn to talk. Because evolution has noticed that you have to go explore to understand things. You can't just have somebody explain it to you. If you just spent the first 10 years of your life lying in bed and someone explaining the world to you, when you first went outside, you'd be overwhelmed. The necessity to explore is absolutely fundamental to human nature and human development and civilization itself. And there's nothing magic about space. We live in space. We just happen to be close to the surface of the planet. Like, there, I got that far away from the planet, you know? I was a little closer to space. It's just our technology is getting better and better and better, making space access suddenly a thing. When I was born, no one had flown in space. This has all happened so fast. And so, where it's going to head, we are going to be able to access resources that are not economically viable or environmentally viable to access on Earth. We are going to be able to understand our planet better. We're going to be able to communicate better because of the high ground and the access that way. We're going to get all our eggs out of one basket, not just living on the space station, but living on our nearest neighbor, the moon. And then eventually we'll figure out the ships that can safely take us and start living in other places as well. And it all sounds crazy, but everything sounds crazy until some people say, that's important to me, that pisses me off. I want to make that happen in my life. I'm going to change who I am. I'm going to organize this group of people. I'm going to gather 30,000 people in Toronto to talk about some of the problems and how we can address them. I'm going to talk to the mayor. I'm going to try and make this thing happen. I'm going to run into all sorts of obstacles, but I am going to, with my particular sway, make this thing happen because it's really important to me. And space, that's just the start of everything else. Thanks very much, everyone.